So, welcome to the Climate Cafe Multi-Faith. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And I'm so glad that everyone is gathered. So, we're going to be speaking with Jessica Sims. So, Jessica was born and raised in Central Virginia, and she holds a lifelong passion for protecting Virginia's waterways. She's co-founder of the Virginia Pipeline Resistors, and has volunteered extensively with local environmental nonprofits, previously worked at the Sierra Club Virginia chapter and their pipeline campaign also. She is currently the Virginia Field Coordinator for Appalachian Voices, which is focused on the fight to stop new harmful fossil fuel infrastructure, including the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which seems to sort of start and stop and start and stop. And it's really important to talk about the ways in which the Mountain Valley Pipeline harms communities, waterways, ecosystems, and, maybe it's time to rethink extractive industries in general and the ways they're done to prioritize communities, clean water, clean air, all the things that we would want to share in a lifetime that's more than just what's the energy that powers your refrigerator. If we can make that clean energy, wouldn't that be better? So I want to say welcome again to Jessica Sims. And Jessica, I'm just so glad you're here. Just want to turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I want to start off, again, Jess, you can call me Jess Sims. I'm here in the Richmond, Virginia area, which is Arrowhead land, part of the Powhatan Confederacy, and have been working on water issues for a number of years, just in my personal capacity and interest as a James River Association river rat, monitoring the James River a couple counties over, and then got to know sort of the systems of political power and pressure through the coal ash fight that happened here in Virginia. And this is specific to our monopoly utility provider, Dominion Power, and their efforts to not treat toxic coal ash wastewater before they put it into streams in Quantico Creek in Northern Virginia and the James River. So got to understand sort of the depth of the bad actors that were harming Virginia communities. It was especially important for me to understand as someone who grew up in a county that has one of their large coal-fired power plants. Blessed to have the opportunity to work on these issues and to get to meet and work with amazing people who are really the biggest blessing of all of this is getting to meet everyone that is working on this. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, just briefly, about what Appalachian Voices works on. I'm on the anti-pipeline, anti-fossil fuel campaign, but we do a lot of work throughout the Appalachian region to support and make opportunities for the communities here. And then we'll go into, as Richenda put it, a tale of two pipelines. We've got some information on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, but has since been canceled. And then just a brief moment to pause on the another fracked gas project that's currently impacting Virginia. All right. So just to give you a little bit of background, and we're a regional organization that overall is working towards a clean, equitable energy future in the Appalachian regions of Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. We also do work in West Virginia. We came to be through the fight against mountaintop removal, and I'm a field coordinator, so a lot of my work is getting to meet and work with and support the communities fighting projects, and that looks like lots of grassroots engagement and time just spent in community. But we also do a lot of legislative engagement. We work in a lot of very opaque and pointlessly complicated regulatory spaces and try and provide assistance so that others can understand and navigate those places. We also participate in legal cases related to some of the most onerous projects that are trying to be built, or ones that are built and continuing to harm people, including mines that are producing acid mine drainage. So I get the opportunity to be in community, in the places I get to work, to have amazing partnerships with those that are leading the fight. These are certainly community-led fights, And that kind of relationship building and outreach is one of the ways that we are helping get decision makers to listen, to help bring opportunities for them to learn about the communities that are impacted. And one thing that I have seen in my time from Sierra Club to now and in the MVP and ACP fights is the sort of shift in national conversation about these issues, which it's unfortunate that it's taken so long for it to be sort of front of mind for people that climate change is this dangerous and this real. But I'm glad that we are talking in terms of environmental justice and impacts to communities of color, Black communities, and Indigenous communities, and that Mountain Valley Pipeline is in the national conversation. And I'm sorry for the way that's come to be, but Senator Manchin's unintentional impact of trying to fast track that project legislatively has had that impact. So just a little bit about our other programs. You may be familiar with mountaintop removal. It's an extremely harmful way of mining for coal that involves explosives blasting off the tops of mountains. Essentially, it describes itself to access those seams of coal inside. And so when that process occurs, you're removing all of that tree cover, all of that topsoil, anything that would kind of keep it stabilized. And so that kind of runoff and continued runoff is going to head down the side of the mountains and go into waterways. You see here mentioning burying headwater streams and potentially impacting water resources. So we've seen that it's had a horrendous impact on the ecology of the regions where this happens. This is what sort of brought Appalachian Voices into existence in terms of our work with other communities fighting mountaintop removal, and one that continues today through our work to hold polluters accountable and work against the negative impacts of coal mining while working to support those communities as we hopefully transition to a clean energy future. And in terms of holding polluters accountable, we also do a lot of work on that in Virginia and North Carolina on coal ash. So as you probably know, you're burning coal, it's going to create a toxic sort of waste material. And so those waste materials are stored in large ponds. I can speak to the ones in Virginia where, as they were built in the 50s, early 60s, they are in unlined ponds, which leak those toxins into the ground. There wasn't a requirement for them to be lined at that time, but you have all these decades of accumulated leaching into groundwater that leads to extreme health impacts to those that live nearby, including not being able to even have access to their drinking water sources, serious impacts like cancer. So there's been an effort within the state of Virginia to have those cleaned up. Legislation was passed to have them remove the coal ash waste and put it either in a lined pond or recycle it. So that is slowly underway, and only through extreme political, public, and continued pressure was that able to be achieved. It was indicative of the larger idea that fossil fuel infrastructure is placed in communities where the bad actors, the developers, the money makers of these projects, the developers of the projects, think that they're going to have little to no resistance and that they're putting projects in communities with little political power. And so what we've seen in Virginia is that is just not true. The communities that have fought these projects, coal ash ponds, ACP, MVP, have power and have wielded it for years. So within our work in Tennessee and North Carolina, it's more serious as it relates to coal ash because there's been huge containment spills of the ponds. And so we work with communities at the stage that it happened, at the cleanup stage, and then getting those folks that have been impacted by that to have access to appropriate health care. And that would include our work with Black Lung. So going through some of the other programs, we are very much invested in transitioning Appalachia to a new economy, one that is healthful and helpful for communities. So a lot of our work in our Norton office focuses on that. And that's a lot of times coming through our solar development work. So switching gears, My focus is on the stopping pipelines and fracked gas, and specifically it's new infrastructure. Virginia does have a lot of existing underground infrastructure of smaller pipelines. But my focus is on, previously I've been on stopping the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, stopping the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and the newest one called the Virginia Reliability Project, in terms of interstate lines. So a little bit into this. Some of y'all are very familiar with these projects. This might be new to some, but the map that you're seeing right here includes with the red line, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which was proposed in 2014. And as you can see, is traveling from West Virginia into Virginia. It is through incredibly steep terrain, dangerously steep, the kind of steep that their equipment rolls down the mountain while they're working. It is terrain that is karst limestone, so very porous, essentially very crushable, and impacts in one place where they're doing work can actually sort of spider web out to other areas, and you're impacting wells, ponds, drinking sources for your neighbors very far away. Where the red line stops, we'll see a map a little bit later. The developers do have a plan to bring it into North Carolina. So that's another project that has been community-led in terms of the opposition to that, and that's MVP Southgate. The pink line that you see, so with the MVP is about 303 miles. The pink line is the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which was 600 miles. And you can see also kind of at the same starting point, traced through another mountainous part of the state, and then onto flatter farmlands through the Piedmont, and then coming down to the border with North Carolina, branching off to go to an incredibly populous center, the Norfolk Hampton Roads area of Virginia, and then would have traveled down through North Carolina. So we saw both were routed in ways where there was not much care taken to determining the route. Dominion's developers bragged to the media that they came up with their route in a weekend. And we saw that MVP's developers certainly did not understand the land or the region, in that they included the steepest terrain and steepest slopes and plans to just cross mountains and degrade entire ridges. So what we saw from the very beginning was that community resistance was immediate and well organized. Those that live in these areas know their land, and they know how harmful this could be. So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, as I said, 600 miles. It was a project of our utility monopoly providers. So in Virginia, it's Dominion Energy has the majority of the state. And in North Carolina, it's Duke Energy. So they came together for this plan to essentially write into their the charges to their captive ratepayers a way to have this project and get a return no matter what. So it's another complication of it. They seem to have purposefully routed this through multiple communities, and the ACP, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, is a major standout for environmental injustice and environmental racism based on where they decided to place their compressor stations and the route overall. So when we see mentioned there, Union Hill, Northampton, and Robeson County. So I've got a picture of now, these are some of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline fighters that are from Buckingham County. So we'll see a video that talks about them in just a moment. But I want to mention too, when we're looking at Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and you can see, let me go back to the map. You have to have a compressor station. You see there the kind of squiggle square shapes are the proposed compressor stations for these. So on Mountain Valley Pipeline, the one that they have tried to get a permit for Southgate extension would be at the end of the red line. It is not pictured there. And then it is rumored that they may be trying to bring another station to Montgomery County, Virginia. But in the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, you see just above Farmville, there's a proposed compressor station. Dominion thought, we're going to save a buck by not having our stations very close together, like is recommended, and instead we'll have the largest 54,000 horsepower compressor station, largest on the East Coast. and we're going to find a community that we don't think will give us political resistance or pressure. And they thought Buckingham, Virginia would be that case, would be that place. And so we saw compressor stations were planned for Union Hill, which is a historic Black community that was the site for that compressor station. The developers purchased land that had been previously a plantation, and they did not notify the communities nearby, many of whom are part of the historic Freedmen community of Union Hill. And so they are essentially being told 50 feet from your house is going to be the East Coast's, largest compressor station. There's nothing you can do about it. Our state agency said there's no cultural significance in the region based on EJ screens that were inaccurate. And so it took the community coming together to get good data into the record. That's that regulatory approach to get national attention on this issue and the injustice of them purposefully trying to put a compressor station in this community. And then to keep that conversation going. The other important thing that has been happening this whole time and has grown stronger was sort of the collaborative work between ACP and MVP fighters, and how important it is to keep the conversation, including both of them. So we saw folks in Buckingham. So pictured here, you have neighbors, you have those that are allies that may live, the next county over, but have personal ties to the area because one reason or another, including Yogaville, which is a yoga ashram that is in Buckingham County. And then we saw religious leaders. Baptist minister Pastor Paul Wilson became an integral figure in this fight too. And so with that community resistance, which also occurred pretty much, not to keep going back to this map because there's no county names on it, but every county along the route, and the same with MVP, all these counties along the route formed their own resistance groups and collectively worked together to get good info out to the public, keep people informed, fight it at the local level, regulatory level, state level, FERC level, which is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Every which way you could think of, death by 1,000 cuts, folks embraced that and worked in community with each other for this. So you see that Atlantic Coast Pipeline, where I was in Richmond, it received a lot of media attention because Dominion is such a power player, pun intended, within this community, has a lot of cultural and political influence. So we saw all sorts of ways people were fighting it. The example here is a rally with 1,000 people that was in opposition to the pipelines. This was ahead of some DEQ hearings. So this was a rally for both Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast Pipeline. But what we saw there sort of touched on how members of faith communities were really integral and continue to be to both these pipeline fights. For a moment, we saw Swami Dayananda, who is a Swami with Yogaville, standing beside Pastor Paul Wilson. And you may have seen Virginia Interfaith Power and Light had a huge role in this fight and continues to do so. And much of the event that you saw clips of from 2019, May of 2019, when we held a march for Union Hill, followed by a protest the next day about MVP, you saw an event that was largely focused on bringing faith into that conversation, and this idea of stewardship and caring for each other, our community, our environments. And so you can see too, that also was integral, those friendships, those partnerships to the fight. You can see Reverend William Barber, who is a tremendous ally to those within these fights, has spoken out against the environmental racism of the ACP and has also come in support of stopping the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We saw the leaders in Buckingham really helping people understand how it would impact their communities and working together. In fact, you can even see for the with the image with the sign, we've got Pastor Paul and Swami Dayananda walking there together at the end of that. And so these ideas, like Morris spoke of earlier, where it's neighbors who might not have known each other so well or agreed or had sort of the same idea about certain things, these sort of unexpected friendships happen. And so the Baptist community and the Yogaville community really teamed up together to help for the ACP fight. So this tremendous community-led work happened in North Carolina also. So we saw a lot of ways folks participated. They're coming to hearings, they're holding rallies, they're walking the route to raise awareness of where it will be going through. They're getting involved in other issues that are impacting the area. So biomass factories, wood pellet factories, amplifying the fight against coal ash spills in North Carolina. This idea of, as shown on the sign there, protecting the people and places that they all live and they all care about. And this overarching idea of caring about your neighbor, which has been a really beautiful part of both fights. So Mountain Valley Pipeline is, again, 303 miles crossing many West Virginia counties and 6 Virginia ones. What we've seen with that is pretty much off the bat, it was harmful to water resources. Oh, I guess I should say I skipped the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So we're building these campaigns, and it's community-led, and it's Black and Indigenous-led leadership that has really helped people understand what is happening with that project. And so we saw this kind of sustained pressure lead the developers to rethink their plan. And in July of 2020, much to the surprise of many, on July 5th, they announced that they had canceled the project. So we know that that was because of community pressure, that they probably saw opportunity in other ways to make money to help their utility businesses. But it was because that national spotlight continued to be on the project, and the pressure from communities, those fighting it and their allies, did not stop. And so we've seen that same fight in the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We know that this is a harmful project. We know it will never be completed, but these developers are hanging on to this misguided belief that the project is going to happen. And so in doing so, they've brought significant harm to Southwest Virginia and West Virginia. They've had, now I'm going to increase this number. It's actually over 500 water quality violations when you include West Virginia. The way they report theirs is sort of one violation made up of multiple violations. So we've seen at every moment of this, they have been unable to build this pipeline safely. And if it were to be operational, it's the equivalent of about 23 coal-fired power plants or 19 million passenger vehicles in terms of emissions. So water disaster in the present, climate disaster if it were operational. So things that were predicted in 2017 and 2014, 2015, 2016, by community members saying, this is what's going to happen if you build this project. You're going to see significant failures of erosion and sediment controls. We're telling you this is going to happen, and all of that happened. And so this idea that communities are, and their input is dismissed, is extremely distressing. And so, one of our goals is, what are all of the ways we can help get that message out there? So you see 2 examples from Franklin County, one of just extreme failures of erosion and sediment control on a family's land, and then sort of the unfinished pipe laying in the sun is sort of the example on the right, an image from Mountain Valley Watch. So now we have a project that's lost its federal authorizations repeatedly. It's currently without its Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, or Army Corps authorizations. They're unable to build in any of the waterways along the route. And so we see it's kind of stalled. We've also seen that pipe has been sitting in folks' yards for years, degrading, taking on the sun and degrading the pipe coating. So there's additional concern about what they would be putting into the ground. And when they do get it in the ground, the problem doesn't stop there, because we're seeing increasingly landslides and pipe slippage in what's already in the ground in West Virginia. And so we have a project that is barely half done. Developers would want us to think, and want legislators and want people in power to think, and the media, that it's almost done, and kind of put out this idea. It's almost finished. Let's just finish it. It's so much easier to finish it. Well, that's not the case. It's 56% complete to full restoration. So that's about half, and that's different than saying something's almost done, which is disingenuous. We also have seen, even as recently as this week, investors are taking impairment charges on it because it's really a project that is beleaguered and riddled with problems and cannot be built safely. And so we see a project that is harmful to people, but it's also harmful to all the species along the route. We have two examples here of the endangered Roanoke log perch and the endangered candy darter, who've sort of been these sort of symbols of the impacts to the ecosystems of the area that are found along the route and would be irreparably harmed by the project. And so that has come into play in terms of the federal authorizations they have and have not been able to get back. So much like we saw with the ACP, it is continued sustained community-led resistance. It is unlikely friendships working together. It's those concerned about the project from a variety of reasons, eminent domain, those that are trying to move us faster to a clean energy future, those that are worried about the harms to people, the air, the water, the health of everyone. And so that resistance continues, and it is only growing. That is another remarkable thing about this fight, is that it is a project which only grows in the scope of how many people know about it and want to fight to help stop it. So what you see pictured here are a rally we held in Richmond about the hundreds of violations at that point in Virginia that had been incurred and harmed our water resources, and then a national rally that was held in September that focused on Mountain Valley Pipeline, in addition to all of the other sacrifice zones that are created by the fossil fuel industry, and that Senator Manchin was introducing a bill that would essentially lift that up to allow our bedrock environmental protections to be harmed, to interfere with tribal autonomy, to undermine the Clean Water Act, and specifically he named completion of Mountain Valley Pipeline. And so we saw this sort of pet project for him being pushed into the forefront. As we mentioned earlier, the Southgate is the extension of that. So that's also a part of this that is intentionally routed through communities of color and indigenous communities in North Carolina, specifically the Occaneechi-Saponi community. And so we've seen incredible leaders. And I guess the Power Coalition is the community-led group of resistors in Virginia. And in North Carolina, tremendous work from groups like Seven Directions of Service, which is an indigenous-led organization helping to lead that fight. These are certainly fights that are arduous and long and have really been led by incredible people who are willing to continue that fight in any way that they can, from phone calls, emails, letters, talking to neighbors about it, going to meetings, telling a reporter about it, holding rallies, holding art events, holding concerts. Sort of every way you can think of to help fight it is some of the creative and supportive ways in which communities are working to fight this project. So that continues. Senator Manchin intends to bring his bill back and attach it to the budget or the National Defense Authorization Act. So that's where the fight is right now at the congressional national level. And yeah, that's little information. So two pipelines, both didn't mention, 48-inch diameter pipes, huge impacts to the land that they would be placed through, and certainly community-led resistance that we are really proud to support at Appalachian Voices.